Okay. Entonces, just let's get started.
Okay.
Give me a sec because somebody was going to introduce you, but well, generally, in general terms, welcome everybody. All right, it's a great pleasure to have you all here. Um, the spirit for today is basically to share basically here in Argentina the fact that this year there were many a very important presence of Latin America in IATEFL. Of course, Gabriel is one of the most important cases because he managed to be the first Latin American president of the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. So that, and he's a mentor in for us. Basically, we've been working together for many years. So we couldn't think of any better way of starting this seminar than with him, who is giving us a general framework, okay, of the kind of practices that we think are necessary in our parts of the world. Okay, so yep. So then, without further ado, Gavito, it's all yours. We're all here to listen to you. Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you very
Thanks a
much.
million.
No, thanks a million to you for the invitation. It's an honor for a Uruguayan to be part of this event across the river. I wish I had been able to be there in person, but it will happen in the future, hopefully. I submitted a proposal to IATFL for the 2025 conference that I called "Why Teacher Educators Should Read Paulo Freire Today," and the reason why I created this presentation, this paper, is because I feel that we still have a lot to do in terms of teacher education becoming a more dialogic process. And one of the presentations that really impacted my thinking in IATFL 2025, and I was so fortunate to be able to attend on the first day, and mine was on the third day, so that I could reference her, was a presentation on teachers' work conditions delivered by the then president of IATFL, Alexandra Popovsky. Alexandra talked about teachers' work conditions, and she made a point of emphasizing that one of the reasons why we have severe problems in getting recognized socially is because we are not, in fact, a profession. And she presented some research by Ellis Vane and others from 1969. Look at this. They classified professions and semi-professions. And if you look at what they said about a semi-profession, we tick all the boxes, right? We have a lot of administrative control as teachers. There are supervisors who oversee what we do. Our occupational status is low, hence our salaries are low. Society blames us for a lot of things. If anything goes wrong in society, it's the fault of teachers and education. There's a preponderance of women in the profession, more women than men. And unfortunately, you know that in our profession, you can become a teacher by taking a 1 month course, right? Like the certificates in English language teaching, which do not give you a teacher education, but they prepare you to be a replicator of certain behaviors in the classroom. And those short training periods also emphasize that once you have that certificate, that's enough, right? You may do a diploma, perhaps, but there's less emphasis on continuous professional development. And in terms of knowledge and skills, if you take the shortcut into the profession, one of these certificates, there's less specialization because it's a very general thing, right? And knowledge development is quite restricted. If we look at what is happening in teacher education around Latin America, This is my metaphor for the banking concept of education, where what teachers do is basically fill out, make deposits, as Freire would say, into the student's head. And I immediately thought to one of the great theoreticians in teacher education, who's Lugran, who said in 2007 that of all the knowledge areas of human endeavors, teacher education is the one that does not have a pedagogy. There is a pedagogy for teaching history, science, math, etc., but teacher education does not have that. And over the past 15 years, what I've been trying to do is to come to my senses and try to develop something that will work for my students and myself as a teacher educator, right? And this is what I'm going to share with you. And of course, while I was thinking about this possible pedagogy for teacher education, Paulo's voice was prominent in my background. So what I tried to do in this presentation in IATEFL was to share a few quotes that are not very well known by Paulo and get teacher educators to think about how this can translate into what teacher learning is. Because if we are true to our core, we have to acknowledge that over the past 30 years or more, 40 years now, a lot of research has gone on teacher education and how we teachers learn, but that has not been taken up in much of the practices of teacher education around, I'm going to call the region, right? Because we still see very heavy curricula, full of contents, and it's a content-centric curriculum and not a pedagogy-centric curriculum. If we turn the tables and we made it more pedagogy-centered, then the words of Paulo will guide us, can guide us, may guide us, could guide us, and we could develop something more real. Because the fact is that when we work as teacher educators in public education, we cater for the needs of the most vulnerable members of our society, and we are a profession. Now, what we have to do is to show society what we can do. So, without further ado, let's get started with my first quote from Paulo. And here is the basis of my talk, right? There is no such thing as neutral educational project. We may see syllabi, we may see curricula for teacher education that are very standardized, according to international mandates or communiques, as Paulo would say. But what works in our part of the world, in our neck of the woods, in the schools where we do our job, cannot be standardized. Unfortunately, neoliberal mandates try to make conformity the basis of all education and training. There is one way of doing things, even though they say, no, we are doing new methodologies, but there is one way of doing them, right? So Paulo's ideas that there is no such thing as neutral educational project has us thinking about the purpose, right, of what we do. And what we do is to try and make the lives of people we like, we care for, we love better. So, what are the bases of this pedagogical framework that I'm going to try and introduce? The first one is to understand that what we consider our here and now for our students so far is the there and then. We never get there by starting from there. You have to start from here. So who you are, how you became this user of more than one language that wants to some sort of empower others to use that language so they can have a better possibility in life. So the first part of a pedagogical framework would be exploring what we call our apprenticeship of observation, right? That is, by the time we get to teacher education, we have spent thousands of hours witnessing teaching. And we know what good teaching is and what bad teaching is. However, we consider good teaching that which helped us learn. It's our there, right? But the students there is different. So we need to be able to bring out into the open this apprenticeship of observation, which is intimately tied to our funds of knowledge. So, who we became as a consequence of living in society, in families or social groups, and how we transmit that, which is in essence a core of values and social practices, how we transmit that when we act in the world and with the world. And the students also have funds of knowledge. So there's generally a clash. If we can connect our experience as learners of languages to why the teachers did what they did to us, we can better understand what we need to give our learners today. Now, both the apprenticeship of observation and the funds of knowledge affect the way that we engage in dialogue with the students. So we cannot say, oh, because when I was a student, we learned in this way, and now I have to teach in this way. We have to look for what tickles the student's learning bone. So we need to start the journey by disclosing, by opening up to scrutiny, by posing questions and allowing multiple perspectives on the same phenomenon. We know that the best method does not exist and will never exist. As Freire said, the main tenet of what we do in the classroom should be this: think about who you serve doing what you do, but also consider against whom or in favor of whom and why do you do what you do. Many times we see learning data shows that students do not learn much. But nobody wonders whether the curriculum and the mandates from the ministries are the ones who are that are affecting what we do in the classroom. One of the things that Paulo was felt very strongly about was about our being truly critical if we live the plenitude of our praxis. What is praxis? Praxis is not just acting, but reflecting about what we've done so that we can do that in a different way if necessary, right? And basically, what happens in teacher education is that people come with very naive understandings of what teaching is. But there's a science behind what we do, and there is a sociology of what we do in the classroom. So it's not enough to be able to, oh, I was a student in this way. I used to learn grammar, so now I teach mostly grammar, but that is not what my students want. That is not enough. We also need to be able to notice what our students need. And noticing is a discipline. Noticing entails, first of all, becoming aware of something we were not aware before. But just becoming aware is not enough. We need to mark it. We need to know, okay, oh, this is what really the students need and what works. And after you do that, you need to register it. You need to somehow code it into your own practice. Now, this is at the level of perception, right? At the beginning of the process. And the connection I found with Freire's ideas was this: teacher educators, we have a set of organized knowledge about the profession. Our student teachers don't. So it is our task to engage in dialogue so that we can help them appropriate this organization through representation, presenting things from their perspective, from the perspective of the students, the perspective of the institution, or our perspective. Which leads us to conclude that, of course, when we are doing this, we are not just teaching, we are also learning, right? And to Paulo, learning precedes teaching. First, you have to learn, then you can teach. And this is, to me, the main argument for developing a specific pedagogy for teacher education. When learning, we need to access what we can call the bottom of the discipline, the depth of the discipline. And access entails theory with a capital T, knowing about research in teaching and learning, but not just language teaching and learning as political, human, and social acts, but also being able to access our own theories, the ones that we develop on the way to becoming a teacher, and with the ones we develop on a day-to-day basis when we are in schools with our students and we see this is what they need, this is what I can do, this is what works, this is what doesn't. Of course, every discipline has two kinds of structures, right? A syntactic structure and a semantic structure, just like language. This is the discipline. The syntactic structure is how we talk about our discipline, how knowledge is represented and organized, right? If we think about a teacher education curriculum, we have discursive practices on the one hand, but we have didactics on the other, we have culture on the other, we have assessment on the other. So those are the syntactic structures of the discipline, the ones that keep our discipline organized, coherent, and consistent. But there's also a semantic structure that is in constant change, and that is how we name, how we reify, how we say this is important, and how we put the knowledge into practice. And that changes. That changes all the time because it's a social act, it's a community act. People are doing teaching in different parts of the world, and we need to access that. So, how does this access connect to Freire's ideas? Well, Freire talked a lot about codifications to get people to understand what the reality or what place in the world, their place in the world is. In general, in teacher education, we use methodology books, a few academic articles, but most of the times we rely on the good old textbook, right? And we present the codifications in the light of the language learner. Now, we are dealing here with language teachers, so we need to have different codifications. And what are those codifications? Well, lesson plans, transcripts of classes, videos of classes, interviews to student teachers, to teacher educators, to students, all those things that make the trade, that make up the trade of the professional dimension of our profession. So we have to skew away from the course book and start with the tools that we use for teaching. And the purpose of that is that when we have access to the theory with a capital T and theory with a small t, we can practice the theory, but not just to put things into practice, but so as to theorize our own practice. So we are living educational theories. We are developing theories all the time. So if we know that we are both teachers and learners, we must acknowledge that we learn how to teach, but we learn how to teach when we teach something that is relearned as it's being taught. And this is a concept that comes back from Roman times. In Roman times, and I see it's 9:23, I still have 10 minutes because we started 5 minutes late. In Roman times, they had this concept of docendo discimus, which is translated as men learn as they teach. Now, one of the problems that we have in teacher education is the concept of teaching practice. That tells us that name tells us that what we are implementers of something. We practice something. I like to call teaching practice in a different light. I like to call it early professional experiences. And I'm very Deweyan in that sense because I believe in the continuum of experience, as Dewey mentioned. Every experience that we have affects significantly how we perceive the experiences we have had before, but also they affect the experiences we will have in the future. So, in this approach to a pedagogy to teacher education, I call this stage the bridging. What does the bridging mean? Well, before going into an actual classroom and deploying our new knowledge, what we do is we use our teacher education classroom as a laboratory, if you wish, where we can practice in very artificial conditions, but conditions that will give us feedback on how we are doing things before we actually go and do it in the classroom. This entails developing lesson plans together, doing micro teaching, teaching somebody else's lesson plan so that the person can see how their theoretical intentions are enacted in real life. We need to understand that teaching is a highly complex activity, right? And that is bound by some ethics. One of the ethics is the ethics of caring. So if I know that somebody's going to take a leap and do something new, it's my duty as a teacher educator to give them, to create the conditions that so that they can do that in a way that is safe to them, right? And what happens when we are trying things out in the comfort of our teacher education classroom is that we do investigations. What we're doing is probing into my intentions and the reality, right? And basically, what we are doing is affording student teachers the opportunity to get tools to change reality. And this is our main commitment. If we go to Paulo's ideas, right? During the bridging moment, we give them time and space to initiate what he calls thoughtful action. It's not just reproducing a lesson plan, it's doing the lesson plan, questioning it, maybe a micro teaching where you start the lesson and the teacher educator says, okay, now you stop. Let's all comment on what we have seen, and allowing spaces for this dialogue to be generated and sustained. Why? Because of, as Paulo says, human activity consists of action and reflection. It is praxis. It is a transformation of the reality of the world. So human activity is both theory and practice. It is reflection and action. So once we have the bridge, we know what may work or no, or not. We have to put it into practice in a real classroom. And that means advocating for teaching which is really, truly democratic. So the main thing is for us to recognize, going back to the quotation before, who am I doing this for? Who am I doing this against? Right? So here the language learner takes center space. And when we're launching, which is the next step, we're launching our new learning, what we are doing is increasing everyone's opportunity of participation in communal activity. So we are giving student teachers the chance of becoming a teacher educator, a teacher, sorry, by allowing them to teach, by enabling, hence the name of this framework, enabling spaces so that they can act, they can reflect, and in doing so, they can transform and not merely accept a readily given reality. We know it. I mean, when we talk about public education, many times we say, oh, I'm teaching third grade and I'm still teaching simple present. That kind of discourse that entrenches us and limits us comes from this habitus, as Bourdieu would say, this way of doing things that, because we are young or inexperienced as people would have us, imply that we perpetuate the status quo. And we need to understand that reality is not something fixed. It's really a process. And that reality changes constantly. And it changes through our action, through our reflection, and through the actions of our students. So this is the imprint. When we launch, when we put into practice whatever theory we have created ourselves or learned from other theoreticians, what we're doing is transforming reality. And we need to keep our eyes open to the learners and their needs. And last but not least, being a student teacher in a teacher education program is an activity that develops double consciousness. You're at the same time a student, and at the same time you're a teacher. And which are you mostly, right? Now, in dialogic teaching, we understand that we are both teachers and learners all the time. It's not a matter of status, of saying I'm just a student. No, I am a student. Take the just away. And when you say I'm a teacher educator, right? You can say I'm a teacher who is also learning about education, right? This quote by Freire from Pedagogy of the Oppressed gives us a new dimension after the process of learning something I have just described. And that is the process of becoming and being constantly in a state of change and flux, because we are acting, we are reflecting, and it's that reflection that prompts new action. It's not repetitive action, right? And so the last moment of this enable framework is that of extending. What does it entail? Well, basically, when we reach the end, we find ourselves at the beginning. We are learners and teachers all the time. We are developing praxis. Vygotsky used a Russian term, which is obuchenia, to refer to the fact that any educational encounter, both teacher and learner influence one another. We teach as we learn, and we learn as we teach. That is somehow a mantra that we adopt if we take this position. Because one is a teacher and a learner at the same time, we have to admit that we all teach and learn from one another. It's not a matter of seniority, of age, of experience. It's a matter of interaction, of dialogue. And basically, this implies for the teacher educator that you will not try to normalize the findings of the student teachers investigators, but you will facilitate spaces for that reflection, collective reflection, group reflection to surface, so that we can prompt further investigations. And I wrote that this is the ultimate act of humility, because if we truly abide by this, we know that a better future is possible. So one possible way forward, I'm not saying this is the one, this is the one that has worked for me, is what I call the enable framework, that allows student teachers different kinds of learning that teachers need to do. We have to learn to see, we have to learn to do, and we have to learn to become. Each of these learnings entails different approaches, different activities that bring in what the student teachers have, what the learners in their classrooms have, what the teacher educator has. And we have different codifications, we have different purposes, etc. But the crux, the center, the essence of this framework is mediation. We don't learn alone. We can learn through self-access, yes, because we have memories, we have experiences to relate, and we have our apprenticeship of observation. But there's always some mediation of another human being, even in that self-access. Then there's scaffolding, which is what teachers do when you transfer control of an activity over to a student. There's collaborative learning in this model, student teachers working with student teachers together. And there is reciprocal teaching, student teachers teaching student teachers. And of course, with the advent of technology, we also have technology supported learning, because nowadays with AI, I cannot tell you how many attempts at planning we have done with AI, and we never got a good class. We never got a good lesson. We asked AI to develop materials. We never got good materials. That means we are still the most important factor. In a nutshell, and I'm finishing in 1 minute, is that at the point of encounter, there are neither utter ignoramuses nor perfect sages. There are only people who are attempting together to learn more than they now know. And this is the message I would like to leave you with. I want to thank you for listening. If you want to read a little bit more about this, I would recommend the whole of Paulo's production, particularly a book that many people seem to know. It's a 1996 book called Letters to Christina, Reflections on My Life and Work. This is a series of correspondences that he had with his niece, Christina, who remained in Brazil while he was in exile. Beautiful reading. So I thank you very much, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.